All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to unpack one of the most influential and controversial political pamphlets ever written, Vladimir Lenin's What Is to Be Done. Now, this wasn't just some book published back in 1902. It was a blueprint, a call to action that would literally shape the entire 20th century.
To really get this book, you have to go back in time. Picture this. It's Russia, 1902. You've got this massive, top-heavy empire run by a czar, and it's just teetering on the edge of chaos. And underneath all that imperial power, something else is bubbling up. A workers' movement is getting stronger by the day, fueled by new factories and a whole lot of social unrest.
So, yeah, this whole movement, it's standing at a huge crossroads. You could feel the energy in the air, right? But nobody really knew which way to go. And that is the critical choice that Lenin is jumping into head first.
So this brings us to the big question, the one everyone was asking at the time. You've got strikes and protests just popping up everywhere, seemingly out of nowhere. It's raw, it's organic, and it's powerful for sure. But is that kind of spontaneous energy enough? Can that raw power, all on its own, actually pull off a full-blown revolution? That's the puzzle Lenin is trying to solve.
And his answer, the core of the entire book, boils down to this one fundamental conflict, the difference between spontaneity and consciousness. And for Lenin, trust me, these were not just some, abstract ideas. They were everything. They were the two possible fates of the entire revolution.
Okay, so what did he mean by the spontaneous movement? He actually had a pretty nuanced take. He wasn't knocking it, not at all. He saw it as a vital first step, what he called the embryonic form of consciousness. It's that natural gut reaction for workers to say, hey, let's get together and fight for better pay. But, and this is the big but, for Lenin, he argued that if that's all you have, you'll only ever get what he called trade union consciousness. You're just fighting for a better slice of the same old pie, not trying to bake a new one.
On the other side of the coin, you have what he calls social democratic consciousness. Now this is the endgame for him. This isn't about getting a raise. It's a deep, scientific understanding that the entire system is the problem and has to be overthrown. And here's where he drops the bombshell. Lenin's big, controversial argument is that workers can't get to this level of understanding by themselves, just from their day-to-day struggles.
And he doesn't just pull this idea out of thin air, he actually leans on another major socialist thinker, Karl Kautsky, to back him up. This quote you're seeing, it's the key to the whole thing. The argument is basically this. Modern socialist ideas didn't just pop up on the factory floor. They came from academics and intellectuals wrestling with big ideas in philosophy and economics. So that means this revolutionary awareness isn't something that just grows out of the struggle. No, it has to be deliberately brought to the struggle from the outside.
So what you have in Lenin's mind is this huge tug-of-war between two ideologies. If you just let things happen, the spontaneous path, he believed the workers' movement would just get sucked into the mainstream way of thinking, the capitalist way. It'll settle for being a trade union movement, and that's it. To get on that other path, the conscious path, a socialist ideology has to be actively pushed, fought for, and introduced by an organized group. You literally have to fight against that natural, spontaneous drift.
And look, Lenin wasn't just fighting some theoretical battle here. He was taking aim at a very real rival group inside the Russian socialist movement, a group that he thought was the perfect example of everything wrong with spontaneity. He gave them a name, economism.
So, who were these economists? Well, their core idea was exactly what Lenin was afraid of. They believed that revolutionaries should focus almost entirely on helping workers fight for better wages and better hours. They thought that if you just did that, a bigger political awareness would just happen, automatically. That politics would, as they put it, obediently follow economics.
And here's their game plan, basically. They wanted to split things up. They'd say, okay, let the workers handle the economic fight. That's the real stuff. And in the meantime, the intellectuals, the revolutionaries, could go team up with liberals to push for political reforms. It was all about the here and now, the tangible gains. They literally believed a small raise, a kopeck added to a ruble, was worth more than all the grand theories about socialism put together.
As you can imagine, Lenin saw this as a total disaster, a catastrophic betrayal of the cause. And he uses this incredible metaphor to frame the choice. He says, look, we're all marching together on this steep, dangerous path. And now some people are shouting, hey, let's go hang out in that swamp over there. For him, that swamp was economism, a comfortable, easy place where the revolution would just get stuck and sink.
Okay,
So if economism was the problem, what was Lenin's big solution? Well, it was to completely redefine what political struggle even means, to take it way, way beyond the factory walls.
And this slide really lays out the two different worlds. On one side, you've got the economist view, what Lenin calls trade unionist politics. Their idea of politics is basically, let's ask the government for better workplace safety laws. It's all about reform. But then you have Lenin's vision, and it is so much bigger. It's not about reforming the system, but about exposing it, attacking it in every single part of society. From police brutality against students to the persecution of religious minorities, the goal is to unite all oppressed people, with the working class leading the charge to overthrow the whole state.
But to pull off a fight that big, you need a guide. You need a map. And for Lenin, that map was revolutionary theory. This is probably the most famous line from the whole book, and it's the absolute linchpin of his entire argument. Action without theory is just blind. It's just random, spontaneous energy. Theory is what gives the movement direction, purpose, and a real shot at winning.
Which brings us, finally, to the most famous and definitely the most controversial part of what is to be done. This is Lenin's practical solution, his how-to guide for making it all happen, his concept of the organization of revolutionaries.
So Lenin's big answer was a total rejection of just following the crowd. He argued the job of revolutionaries wasn't to tag along where the movement happened to drift, but to build an organization that could actively lead it. And to do that, you needed a completely new kind of party.
And here is the blueprint for that party, what we now call the Vanguard Party. First, it had to be highly centralized and disciplined. No room for amateur hour. Second, its core needed to be made up of professional revolutionaries. We're talking people whose full-time job their entire life was the revolution. Third, the party's main task was to be the vehicle that brings that socialist consciousness into the wider workers' movement. And finally, and this is key, it had to be built to operate in secret to survive the constant threat of the Tsar's police.
Now, it is absolutely crucial to understand the context here. For Lenin, this super-centralized top-down model wasn't just some ideal he cooked up. He argued it was a practical necessity, born from the brutal reality of Tsarist Russia. In his view, it was the only way to survive police crackdowns and unify a bunch of scattered protests into a force that could actually take on the state.
So where does all this leave us? Well, this book clearly wasn't just some intellectual exercise. Its ideas had very real and very dramatic consequences. And they leave us with some profound questions that, frankly, are still unresolved.
Think about this for a second. Just 15 years. That's all it took. 15 years after Lenin published this blueprint, the Bolshevik Party, built largely on these principles, would lead the Russian Revolution and take over one of the biggest empires on Earth. The connection between the idea and the event is direct and just undeniable.
And this is why this book is still so relevant and so hotly debated today. It zeroes in on this fundamental tension that you see in almost any movement for social change. How do you balance the need for effective, disciplined leadership with the equally important need for broad, democratic, bottom-up participation?
Lenin offered a clear, uncompromising answer for his time and place. But the question he forces us all to confront is just as urgent today as it was then. When you're trying to change the world, how does a movement balance the demand for effectiveness with the principle of freedom? It's a question with no easy answer.